Good afternoon. My name is Rashida Brown, and I'm the Associate Program Director for Children, Youth, and Families at the National Association of Counties Research Foundation. We work to strengthen America's 3,069 counties across the nation, supporting their efforts in having healthy, safe, and vibrant communities. Today's session builds on the BUILD initiative publication, supporting Prenatal-to-Three with federal relief funds by focusing on how states and local governments are leveraging funds to support Prenatal-to-Three in early care and education, family support, and maternal and child health. And you'll see the link there that BUILD has put in the chat for us. And you can continue to follow that chat as we're sharing out resources. Today's session is the second of 3 webinar series using federal relief funds to support Prenatal-to-Three agenda. This first webinar focused on early care and education, and today we're discussing family support. And then later we're talking about, we'll have the final webinar that will focus on health, and that will be held in October. We put the registration link in the chat, so we hope that you'll join us for that, and also some resources from the early care and education webinar that came out of that. You'll also see that in the chat. And again, at the end of today's session. So before we move on to introducing our speakers, I want to ask that we hear from you. So please use the chat to ask any questions, share your family support plans, share your efforts in leveraging federal relief dollars. We want this to be an engaging discussion where you can feel free, because you are the local innovators and state innovators that are doing the work on the ground. So we want you to have this opportunity to engage in this session with our leaders that we have on our panel today. So I am pleased to introduce this panel of local leaders that are really taking lead in championing these Prenatal-to-Three efforts in their county. We're glad to have them in the Insight Network and share the local innovation that they're doing within their locality, and how they're leveraging a variety of funding streams dedicated to serving infants and toddlers, especially through these challenging times and the times that our workforce and our families are seeing who've been hit hard by the pandemic. So first, we have Commissioner Lisa Janicki. She is a county commissioner with Skagit County, Washington. And we also have Mary Lee, who is the director of MIL, Multnomah IDEA Lab within the Multnomah County Department of County Human Services. And we also have Kim Perry, who is the executive director for DC Action for Children. Thank you so much to our panel. Thank you for all of the great work that you're doing and for being here today to share that out with the audience. So I will turn it over to Commissioner Janicki, who will introduce some of the great work that Skagit County is doing. Commissioner.
Hey, thank you for teeing this up so nicely, Rashida. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation, and just a tiny bit of background, because I think it will give you an idea of where I come from as a commissioner. I have been in government for just 7 years, but spent 30 years in private business as the chief financial officer for a large family manufacturer, about 900 employees. And so I understand emphatically the value of upfront investment to preempt or defer, future costs, future social costs. So that's the framework that I come from. I have 5 children and now 9 grandchildren who all live within 15 minutes of my house. So seeing those little ones, those tiny humans growing up and just being part, I want that kind of family experience for everyone. So how can I, as an elected official, help make that happen? So if we can go to the next slide, Skagit County is located halfway between Seattle, Washington, and Vancouver, BC, along I-5. 130,000 in population for the county, so pretty rural. Agriculture and forestry is a lot of our land base, but we have a couple of refineries, we have manufacturing and sawmills. So it's a bit of a mix, but the distances are large. Our population is very mixed. We have 4 Native American tribes in Skagit County who have their own cultural and identities, and a large block. The census says it's 18% Hispanic, but our 2 largest school districts run over 50% Hispanic. So that whole, I love the census process, but I don't always, I have to tell you, I don't always believe those numbers. We see lots of, Hispanic kids, and some of those kids are, they speak Spanish, or their families are speak Mestizo. So non-English speaking is a big piece of what's there. And then the 60% Medicaid birth rate is also something that kind of speaks to the demographic that we are working with. If you want to go to the next slide. I am really proud of our health department for pulling together what we call the Population Health Trust. It's the advisory group to the Board of Health, and it was founded in 2015. And broad swath of experts. We've got hospital administrators, we've got transportation specialists, we've got our jail warden there in the back middle row, we've got economic development, mental health, behavioral health specialists within this group, and even like our emergency medical services. What are the paramedics doing around health? And we were able to go through and with Population Health just do these data carousels and really understand what the needs of the community are through gap analysis, and what the strengths in the community are. So if you want to go to the next slide, in 2018, the Population Health Trust put together a first 1,000 days call to action based on the needs of the community. And it just really, beyond identifying some things as like, oh yeah, that is a no-brainer, it also brought together the Children's Council and the early learning specialists into a work group where it was just, it gave, so more than just the data that they had analyzed, it became a part of the stories. And one of the mothers they interviewed said that the quote there, tracking down information, felt like it was an underground network. So the goal was, how do we bring that network into a visible and realm, and have people be able to access from wherever they are, whatever they needed. Next slide. So that became part of the Help Me Grow. We were able to form the Help Me Grow Skagit as part of Help Me Grow, the broader network. And I'm to this day very thankful that that happened when it did, because it gave us, when COVID showed up, at least we had a framework from which to build, but the needs became so much more apparent from these for these young families. And like so many of us had seen, that whole health equity, the disparity between families in our community became really so apparent. And there were families that needed things who had never asked for help before, and whether it was just basic supplies, diapers has become an escalated need in our community. And in fact, our United Way just took over the diaper bank that had been founded just a few years prior, but just being part of the solution. But then there were basic things like cleaning supplies. How does a family get cleaning supplies as we're all trying to sanitize and sterilize our environments? So this was the jumping off point for the commissioners. It made it very easy to allocate CARES funding for this program. You want to go to the next slide? So we were able to, at the recommendation of Public Health and full support from the 4 to 3 commissioners, we located a family resource center at the Children's Museum in Skagit County, and they had just relocated into an empty retail space located in Burlington. And so just a super convenient, super easy, and beautiful space. They spent, the Children's Museum and their donors spent a lot of money making this just a huge welcoming spot. And so we were able to, this familiar space became also just a really important resource. I'm going to run to the next slide. So access to the Family Resource Center can be done, whatever's easiest for the family. So whether it's off their phone, making a phone call, or accessing it on an app or on a computer. And so we were also able to get them connected to other resources like rental assistance, parent support program, and like we all know, the mental health and crises services that have become so needed. Next slide. So this is, you can say, even with a mask, you can tell she's smiling so big because it was such a relief to be able to walk out with those, having some of those immediate needs solved. And we were also able to hire, the health department has hired Promotoras that, speaking the language and approaching the issues, more culturally sensitive way was something that I didn't know. And I have to say that once it was sad as like, we should use the funding to do this. It's like, oh gosh, yeah, that makes so much sense. And some of those basic things, how do you get a social security card for your child? They don't know how to do any, it seems insurmountable. So this Family Resource Center has just become a just easy entry point for our folks. And then when the schools were closed or working hybrid, we also found that the school social workers would come and try to solve some of the, like there's a middle school child who was taking care of a much younger child who was so frustrated and really, taking care of a 3-year-old. So there were games, educational materials, and things, art supplies provided for that younger sibling through the Family Resource Center. Next slide. And this just shows the Children's Museum was a really great partner when we were doing the vaccination site. They set up a play area at the vaccination center so that the children who were waiting with their parents there could play, and the parents were comfortable with this, this space, and they knew the Children's Museum from other interactions. Next slide. I'd like to introduce you to Gabby. She is our new family resource navigator, and will help get more families connected. She's bilingual, and again, the language barrier. We could use so many other languages too. Spanish, Mestizo. The next most commonly spoke is Russian. But this is great strides in just in reaching out to this community. And then the next slide. The dreams, we have all kinds of things we want to do next. I was like, sustainability, how do we keep what we have? I'm like, that's not good enough. We have things we want to do beyond keeping what we've got, what we've paid for with CARES and America Rescue Plan dollars. And the commissioners have set aside a chunk of ARPA monies too. So I'll leave that for our panel. I know there's some questions coming through in the panels, so we'll be able to address that at that point. And the next slide is just information on the Family Resource Center there, which this picture, I love. If you would just put that picture up at the beginning, all the stuff, this is why we do what we do, right? So.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We love to see our elected officials really speaking out and lifting up their story as they become Prenatal-to-Three champions. The work that you're doing in Skagit County is so meaningful. I love how you leverage the Children's Museum as a resource center for the Help Me Grow program. And, you know, Help Me Grow is a centralized intake and referral system that has especially been used in many localities across the nation to help families navigate the supports that they need, especially during these critical times. So thank you so much, Commissioner, for that. And now I'll kick the presentation over to Mary Lee from Multnomah County. Mary, take it away.
Thank you, Rashida. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Lee. I use she or my name. I am Chinese American, and I am both a mother and a parent. And I work for Multnomah County in the Mill, which is the Multnomah IDEA Lab. And I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm really thrilled to be able to talk with all of my colleagues on the panel and all of you. Next slide, please. So we've all been asked to give you a little background about our counties. I want to tell you a little bit about our demographics, and you'll see that we have made particular focus on both the racial and ethnic demographics of our county and also the income and wealth assets. And you'll see a little bit why we do that. I want to make one point, which is to say that when you look at Black, Indigenous, and people of color households and communities in Multnomah County, inside of which is Portland, the city of Portland, what does it mean when 1 in 5 in our community are working and cannot afford to heat and eat and sleep simultaneously, right? They can do it consecutively. If they get a food box here and they put the electric bill off till next month, all of those kinds of strategies that all of us are familiar with. But what does that mean for the community? What does it mean for the energy and the vitalization, right? So that's the outside environment that we work in within Multnomah County. And then I so appreciate Commissioner Janicki being here and for your leadership. Thank you. We see every day how important it is to have elected leadership, particularly at the county level, that supports this kind of commitment and values and visioning and frankly investment. Our Board of County Commissioners are all female and are a majority Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I think that is pretty rare around the country. And I'm going to say woohoo to us, right? Like that's a reflection of the reality of who's in our community, right? It's so important. There are a number of pieces that our county has undertaken as both policy and investments that help understand the background for the Mother's Trust and the unconditional cash transfer that I'm going to talk with you about. The first is we have a primary investment in our county for our workforce equity strategic plan. So it's called the WESP. And that document talks both administratively, operationally, and what is the experience for ourselves as staff within this organization. Underneath the WESP, we have a policy commitment that the Board of County Commissioners has made that is called Inclusively Leading with Race. And what that means is there's established policy along with our own learning and emerging practice that says we lead with race first, because we know that in so many dimensions, the issue of race is the determining one for what the lived experience of the community is. And from a targeted universalism approach, right? You go to where the disparities felt greatest and the benefit encompasses everyone. We look at inclusively leading with race because we know that people have multiple personality, oh dear, they might have multiple, they have multiple intersecting identities, right? And we can't think about people in one box or another box. We want people to show up as their whole selves. And then finally, we were both called out and called in along with many other governmental agencies from a group of community advocates called Reimagine Oregon. And this was specific to the African-American Black community in not only Multnomah County and the state, calling for greater efforts, commitments, and investments for racial justice, particularly within the African-American and Black communities. And our county made commitments that you're going to see reflected not only in the Mother's Trust program, but many other work and effort that we're doing right now. So you see this as part of a larger fabric of what's going on here. And I'll just say, we have supplied a ton of resources for folks. Not all of them are going to be ones that you want to take a look at. Karen's putting them in the chat, and we'll also be able to give those to you en masse if you need them there. Next slide, please. So I'm really happy to talk to you about the Mill. We are a very unique organization in government nationally. There's a lot of innovation labs in government. Largely, they're in information technology or in research evaluation and data places. We are in the Department of County Human Services, and that is a super unique place for us to be in. There are a couple of places where mayor's offices have innovation labs related to economic development and economic justice. But there's really maybe only one other place that does similar work to our work, which is using these design practices, particularly focused on finding innovation and approaches at the intersections of poverty and racism. And we use three main practices. The first is equity and human-centered collaborative design, and that is a very particular set of words together that I'd be happy to talk more about at a later date, and you can see a little bit more about that on our website. The second line of business we have is critical thinking and thought partnership, which is what we're doing right now, listening really well and hard to what other people are interested in, their work, their data, their research, and then talking about those ideas with as many other people as possible to see where the interest lies. Where is their energy? Where is there a moment that feels like it's about to emerge? And then finally, we do applied research tests in the community. And that is indeed what the Mother's Trust is, and some other work that I'll talk about in a minute. About 50% of our work is in internal consultancy. So helping others of our colleagues, both within the county, the city of Portland, and other public jurisdictions, apply equity-based design practices for their planning and policy development. And then 50% is our own work and exploration into the issues of asset, income, and economic gaps that are racially based. Next slide, please. I guess I will say I have the best job in county government. Apologies to anyone else who works in government. I really do have the best job. So I want to talk a little bit before we get into the Mother's Trust about unconditional cash transfer and what does it mean and what is it? This is work that we have been engaged in since the beginning of the Mill and our work. And it really flows out of two pieces or two understandings here. The first is we think we need to change the narrative of who's in poverty and why, because that narrative is driving the kinds of services and supports and responses that we are offering as elected county officials. And the second piece is there's so much data and research that tells us that disparities based on race and ethnicity are real, and they are harming all of us, not just the people who experience them. So the one thing I want to say about unconditional cash transfer is, in addition to getting the short-term reductions in hunger, poverty that you get when you do a cash transfer, when that transfer is unconditional, you also support autonomy, self-determination, and hope. And hope is a research-based factor in change, in behavioral change, right? And we feel like that's important for government to be engaged with. And then of course, these other protective factors, which you all are very concerned with, which is parental role, family functioning, future student success, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. We have done a number of unconditional cash transfer tests in Multnomah County. This is an example of some of them. I want to say two things about this is we look for public-private partnerships wherever we can, because we believe that particularly in the philanthropic relationship, there is something for both philanthropy and government to learn from each other that has to do about system impact. And governmental risk avoidance, right? Who's innovating who's incentivizing the innovation. And then finally, to let you know that we used our CARES Act funds to be able to do unconditional cash transfer. And many people believe that that's not possible. Next slide, please. Our two American Rescue Plan projects that I think are most relevant to this conversation, which is the Mother's Trust, where we will work with 100 African-American, Black, female-headed households with a basic income, and then inviting them to be participant researcher designers with us for a number of other additional efforts, including baby bonds, which are graduated trust accounts, debt reduction efforts, individual development accounts, match savings accounts, and home ownership. And then we're also putting out over $4 million in continued unconditional cash transfer. And I will end with, next slide, our lessons learned. So I'm a proud bureaucrat. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it out there to all of you. Government involvement and leadership does matter in these kinds of spaces. Again, we've got to understand who's in poverty and why, change that narrative from it's an individual problem to there are systems and systemic conditions that create the necessity for people to live in poverty, so that we may change our services and approach to what we're offering as government. We can do it. The government can do services and supports that are culturally specific, unconditional, and intentionally and inclusively lead with race. We can use federal funds. Again, these are all mythologies that I have heard. And innovation and smart risks are a great use of one-time only money, which the ARPA and the CARES Act and others of these federal funds are come. And if I could leave you with one piece, I would say, focus on your aspirations first, figure out what your mission is, catalyze it with yourself and your partners, and then innovate and engage. If we can follow those kinds of practices, we will build a movement that takes us forward in these areas. And I will turn it back over to Rashida. You've got at the end of this.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was excellent, excellent, excellent presentation. We love Multnomah County because of all of the work that they're doing. They're very active in NACO and are using innovative approaches to address equity, particularly racial equity within their county. And I love your participation in this panel because you represent the human services community. Counties, I just want to give you the stat, counties invest in over $63 billion in federal, state, and local funds in the area of human services. They serve as our vital frontline safety net system, and especially with counties, we have a significant number of counties that have significant authority in human services, and they provide, they're pretty much the touch point of children and families prenatal to 3. The guaranteed basic income is definitely something that we'll explore more in the Q&A session. So now I'll pitch it over to Kim Perry from Washington, DC, and she will share the Birth to 3 initiative and Healthy Futures and HealthySteps initiative. So Kimberly, take it away.
Thanks so much, Rashida. I'm so pleased to be with all of you this afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation. And thanks for setting up this important panel. I learn something new every time Mary speaks. And it's just so good to be on a panel, both with Lisa and with Mary. So I appreciate it. So I'd like to share with you just a little bit about the District of Columbia. We are your nation's capital. Our borders are the state of Maryland and Virginia. We are on a pathway to statehood, and we hope to be the country's 51st state. And I'm here representing DC Action, and we are the result of 2 powerful advocacy organizations coming together to be an even more strong and powerful force for kids. DC Action for Children, which has been around since 1992, and DC Alliance of Youth Advocates, which has been around for 20 years, merged last year to become one organization. And boy, are we needed now more than ever to be a louder, bolder, more independent voice for our young people. We do policy work, but we also engage our DC residents and community, and we meet people where they are. We host and manage 4 statewide coalitions. 2 of them are in the early childhood space, the DC Home Visiting Council, and also Under 3 DC, which harnesses the power of residents, early educators, health professionals, and young people themselves to advocate for an equitable early childhood system. A little snapshot about the district. We're small. We have a population of about 730,000 residents. 51% of our population is Black, about 11% Latinx, a little under 2% Asian Pacific Islander, and the rest white. We have, though, an extremely large and concerning wealth gap. The median wealth for our white residents is $284,000, while for Blacks, it's $3,500. So whites have 81 times more wealth than that of Black and Latinx families. About 28,000 of our children are under the age of 5. And 21% of those kids under the age of 5 live in households that are living under the poverty line. So it makes it very tough for folks to access high quality childcare and, of course, other developmental supports for their families. We made a bold goal to close racial gaps in the city within the next decade. I know that sounds extraordinarily ambitious, but the time is now to do something about it. We just can't keep seeing such poor outcomes for all of our young people. And we know that it has everything to do with the legacy of historical racism in this country. And of course, it has a negative impact on our children. So our coalitions are headed by women and by people of color. We believe that those closest to the pain really have the most powerful solutions for their own lives and themselves. So I'd like to share a little bit with you. We were very creative with the use of our ARPA dollars in the sense that we partnered with other coalitions in the city to address some of the largest issues facing our families with children. So you can go to the next slide now. And the first was addressing housing. I don't know about you guys, but our cost of living here is very expensive. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about childcare, health supports, education. Economic security is the fundamental line, a red thread that shows up in all of those issues. And if we don't deal with housing, we're not going to be very successful dealing with anything else. And so many of our families in every kind of survey said that stable housing, quality housing, long-term housing is a huge challenge and barrier to their own family's stability. So we advocated collectively across our early childhood coalitions, how we met up with housing coalitions and came to greater agreements, labor groups, business communities, to put $400 million of our ARPA money toward building, developing affordable housing and affordable housing. Sometimes affordable housing isn't affordable to the families who really need it. So that is included in our historic budget. We also did a revenue raiser this year, and that included compensation increases for early educators, reducing homelessness, and beginning a monthly basic income for families that are struggling financially. I know, Mary, I see you. Yep, hallelujah. And then some additional investments that I'll talk about. So if we go to the next slide, I'd like to share with you the framework we use for our family health supports. You all had another webinar talking about childcare, so I won't spend much more time on that. But I'd like to share that the District of Columbia was the first to implement universal pre-K almost a decade ago. But the piece we left out that we weren't able to get done at that time was care for infants and toddlers and all the wraparound services that we know are important. Family strengthening programs like home visiting, and also programs like HealthySteps, Healthy Futures, and the infrastructure that Help Me Grow can provide. So we did it 2 years ago, and in 2018, we passed what we call the Birth-to-Three law. And it's very inclusive, but it does really 3 things. It makes childcare, the cost of childcare, more affordable for families. So no family spends more than 10% of their income on childcare. It gives a pay raise to early educators to ensure that their salaries are on par with the salaries of our teachers that teach in the public school system. And it provides free and affordable family health supports that I just mentioned, and I'll go into a little more detail there. So we were able to steer many more dollars into the Birth-to-Three law because we advocated for much of the American Rescue Plan dollars to support and stabilize the childcare sector. So it freed up more local revenue to be able to support and sustain our family health support programs. So the few in particular that I'd like to note, and I'll share some links here. If you look at the bottom part of that slide with local general funds, our home visiting programs that really provide family strengthening support for our families prenatal through the early childhood stage is about an investment of $4.6 million altogether. They are implemented through a range of agencies. There is one of those programs that was indeed funded through the American Rescue Plan, and those were prevention of child abuse and neglect programs for fathers and to provide greater supports to dads in the family. We were able to provide some additional funding for HealthySteps programs in the District of Columbia. And many of you have HealthySteps programs in your localities. You know, HealthySteps integrates an early childhood specialist into every child's primary care health team. And so we've started the program with pilots, and we were able to expand the programs to more physicians' offices this year. And then an additional $675,000 for Healthy Futures, which is a mental health consultation program. It occurs inside the classroom. So it's really for early learning centers to have mental health consultation to help providers understand how to work with families, identify if their child might be at risk or have symptoms of social, emotional, or other mental health challenges. Healthy Futures budget altogether is somewhere around $5 million, but again, we were able to sustain, to put more dollars in and make sure that it's sustainable throughout the next 4-year plan, 4 years of our budget plan. I'm going to share in the chat, a little bit more about our HealthySteps program and our Healthy Futures program. So I'm putting these links there. You have both of those. Oops. And the last piece I want to mention, if we go to the 3rd slide, we felt strongly there were 2 additional areas in which our families needed support. And that was around the monthly basic income, that families just don't have enough cash to for the expenses they deem necessary. I really loved Mary talking about autonomy. Families don't like or appreciate government telling them what to do with their money. And so having the flexibility to use it where it's needed is what's necessary. So we chose to expand our local earned income tax credit and pay it out as a monthly basic income. And then finally, to establish a Child Wealth Building Act, which many of you call baby bonds. And our baby bonds program will begin next year. It uses about $36 million of local funds that creates an account for every child born in the district with at about 300% of the federal poverty line, and it would pay out about $1,000 every year. And then of course, when the child turns 18, they can use that for college, business ownership, property ownership, or any other investment. So we tried to be really creative, a couple lessons learned. We couldn't do it alone. We partnered with non-traditional coalitions like labor groups, business and housing coalitions and organizations for affordable housing. And then finally, the work primarily was led by people closest to the pain who knew what the solutions needed to be. So I will stop there and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for sharing that. I am pleased and honored to be a district government, a DC resident, and have worked for district government for a few years, particularly on early childhood prenatal-to-three issues. So I am so excited about the work that you're doing in Washington, DC. Thank you so much for sharing out your work. So now we will have start our panel discussion, and I'd like to also introduce Jennifer Sass-Walton. She's with the Child and Family Health Manager with Skagit County Public Health, and a lot of what Commissioner Janicki has shared earlier is being implemented and kickstarted by Jennifer. So I'd like to just announce her, and she can feel free to join in on this discussion as well. So just starting off with one question, and this really builds from the presentation that we heard primarily from Kim and Mary. Both of you mentioned the guaranteed basic income and baby bonds. You guys have really specific and targeted strategies for addressing the racial wealth gap. And I've seen individual development accounts and various different financing strategies within the child welfare system and within the human services system. So this is a very innovative approach that you guys have shared. Can you talk a little bit about how this originated, and what has this process been? How is that received from the community? Mary or Kim?
All right, I'll start, Kim, and then you pop in too, okay? I'll say a couple of things. One is our theory of understanding of action, particularly in the mill, is that our country and our government was founded on the genocide and the enslavement of African peoples and indigenous nations here. And government was created to uplift and enforce that basis. And I know people are like going, okay, so that was a long time ago, but it absolutely has bearing on how we've come to this discussion about assets. And in some cases, I'm going to say it, and I know I'm hoping we're doing a little bit of letting our hair down, reparations for genocide and for enslavement. So if we caused as government the majority of the disparity and the oppression that are in our communities, we have both a moral obligation to act and some sense of hope that if we did, we could be effective. Now, the county delivers amazing human services every single day that are life-saving to seniors and people with disabilities and survivors of intimate violence, and none of it has lifted any community-wide standard of living to a place where people can be economically stable. And the data is very conclusive about where that's based in racial and ethnic difference. So as I said earlier, we got to rethink what our narrative is about who's in poverty and why they're in poverty, so that we can think differently about what we should be offering and why we should be offering it. And that is why we have started this movement towards unconditional cash, basic income, and approaching people with respect to say, you know best what you need to do to take care of your family. And the research backs this up. So looking at how do we remake our conversations about, let's get case managers to help navigate our Byzantine systems where people are not guaranteed of getting help, but we might get them through the Byzantine system. I'm not saying get rid of case management. Case management is life-saving. And we have to look at the reality of how our community and our economy has been built and put together and who benefits and who does not. All of this analysis and data led us to this place of unconditional cash transfer and basic income. And frankly, the new federal investments are giving us an opportunity to test these ideas locally, and we're taking advantage of it. Kim, I want to hear how you all have been able to institutionalize this, because I am so fangirl about it.
Well, we're just at the start of it as well. Ours happened very organically as well. A grassroots coalition focused on racial equity started in the city a few years ago. And really that coalition, it's been coming out of that coalition, meaning individual residents are part of that, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and all with the goal of looking for solutions to close the racial wealth gap. Particularly for families in the district. One of the pathways to this particular piece of legislation that is meaningful was also setting up a racial equity office in the DC Council, which is our state legislature, as well as the same piece of legislation set up a chief equity officer for the district that sits in the mayor's office. The important part to note about the Office of Equity set up in the council is that they are directed to provide racial equity, racial impact assessments on important pieces of legislation in certain parts of the budget. We've never had that before. It's new, it is groundbreaking. The first couple of pieces coming out from their research has just been mind-blowing and has really helped to tell the truth about the impact of many pieces of legislation that members just pass over and over again, but this time are stopping to take a second look. The last thing I'll note is the champion on the council for baby bonds in the Child Wealth Building Act is Kenyon McDuffie. He is our council member from Ward 5 who led the way to set up the Office of Racial Equity and the piece of legislation I noted. So he has been on a mission to address these issues, and we are excited about working with him on implementing baby bonds. They actually just passed the official legislation yesterday because they put the money in the budget over the summer. So we're a go, and we'll be monitoring, and hopefully we'll do another webinar right in a year, Mary, and see how it's all going.
Thank you so much for sharing. You all have talked about the American Rescue Plan Act. We're so pleased to have the significant investments from Congress to help support our state and local recovery efforts. And for counties, we received $65.1 billion to support our county's efforts. So we're definitely glad to have that flexibility to leverage Prenatal-to-Three, leverage that those funds for Prenatal-to-Three efforts. So just to all of our panelists, and especially you, Commissioner, because the commission boards across the country have a lot of leverage in how they allocate funding within their budget for various different pockets within our public sector system. What was your advocacy strategy to facilitate ARPA funds being used in this manner?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, first of all, I love that Multnomah County has all women commissioners, because I'm one who will say and have often said, I come out of being the CFO in a manufacturing event. I'm the only woman on our board of commissioners, and I will often say that the women have to be the social conscience of the organization. And today I'm just hearing that just played out. You challenge me in a way to even step up the game more. So thank you for that. And with that being said, I don't think it's so much of having to convince anyone. Is just to make sure that it stays, that our priorities stay front and center. And even before the American Rescue Plan dollars came into Skagit County, and our allocation is 25 million over the 2 years. So, you know, we're talking about a lot smaller pot of money. But before the money even arrived, the commissioners did a little mini strategic planning piece, because we knew there were going to be requests that far exceed, you know, what there is to spend. And of course, wanting to support our public health department in full was always the first piece of this. But the disproportionate impact to families was also a very real piece. And so that population health trust that I mentioned, they are working through assessing, you know, what it takes to get. I look at those moms who want to go back to work in some capacity. You know, they have all kinds of choices now with the shortage in labor markets, and they can go back, but they have to know that their kids are safe, and that there's quality child care. It's not just, you know, I mean, that's what we all want. And that basic part of getting our moms back to work keeps childcare, but the economic impact of being able to have families working very much in the forefront of our mind. And I don't think it's so much, I don't feel like I had to arm twist anybody. I feel like when I say it, that, you know, public health fully supports it, our economic development fully support it, our population health trust, they get that, they see the data and the numbers, and I just have to make sure that priority stays in that strategic plan and stays visible, you know, doesn't get lost in the, what do they say, the tyranny of the urgent. That's, you know, it's nothing, it is nothing more than that, but.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Kim, you know, DC has a different structure because we're not a state. But as Kim mentioned earlier, our city council acts as our state legislature. And you particularly sit in an advocacy role. You know, what did that look like within the advocacy community, and who are you able to leverage as decision makers, and how are you able to influence them in your work around ARPA?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to recognize before the ARPA money was, before that passed, really, we had CARES dollars, if you recall, and we were really advocating for the CARES dollars to help stabilize the childcare sector, because while, you know, again, it just is the basis for the economic engine that keeps so many other things going, very much like housing. And so having the ARPA funds was a complete game changer, that it was even more dollars to invest in that stabilization. But $3.5 billion flowed into the district from the American Rescue Plan. And all along, we said there are many needs in the district. Instead of fighting each other over, we're not talking crumbs, it's a lot of money, but instead of fighting each other, let's work together, prioritize, keep in mind our larger equity agenda, use these one-time dollars in places where it matters, and push for local dollars for ongoing investments that we know are important. Honestly, I think those were the key principles that everyone agreed to, and we just had to keep ourselves focused, remember the agreements we made. And also the other piece was not allowing the privilege of professional advocates, which we all have at some point, to take front and center, and remember that families close to this, living this every single day, had to continue to be the architects and to be the leaders. And I believe that is why our council members and mayor were so receptive to some of these larger deals, and why we got some of these major investments. We weren't all fighting for scraps and they didn't have to choose, right? It was, here's what we're putting in front of you as priorities, and we want you to move forward.
And Mary, you guys, Kim mentioned an excellent point, and that is about parent voice and having community members involved in this work. Mary, can you talk a little bit about Multnomah County? Because I've always been hearing about, especially in your Prenatal-to-Three efforts, just the power of parent voice and how you engage folks in your Prenatal-to-Three efforts. Can you talk about a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. Again, I think Commissioner Janicki, you're right on. It starts with understanding and articulating the value, and then you move from the value in every opportunity that you have a decision to make or a resource to assign. So again, we follow in the footsteps proudly, DC. We just recently passed universal early childhood education in the county. I think you all know that. Commissioner Vega Peterson was the stellar leader, and you've all had a chance, and we'll have a chance to hear from her in this work. But we didn't start that work without a clear understanding of what our value was to center the lived experience of parents, and particularly parents who have children who are in the early childhood age range, right? Those of us who have older kids have that experience, but we all know there's something very, very primary about having that 2-year-old that you've got to deal with in that moment while you're still working full time and, taking care of the house, all those kinds of things. So we didn't start building out that process until we had understood and talked about how are we going to ensure that that's going to happen. And that was a very structural and successful part of the entire effort to both create the idea, run the campaign, win the campaign, and now it continues to be the centering of the voice of those with lived experience. It also has to do with our understanding and value around this equity and human-centered design, right? So these design practices, particularly in Portland, are very popular for businesses and for products, and have not been very frequently used in terms of social benefit. By bringing those practices inside of local county government, we have been able to understand how we might run our planning processes, approach these challenges, develop policy with those who have the best lived experience to be centered in that process. I just want to say goodbye to Commissioner Janicki. It was so great to meet you, and I look forward to being able to connect again.
This has been a very inspiring morning, and I'm sorry that I don't get to stay through the end of the wrap up here, but thank you for the opportunity. And I'm going to point you to Jennifer Sass-Walton as very competent and capable of telling the Skagit County story. So
thank you so much, Commissioner. And to the Build folks, if we can promote Jennifer, that would be great so that she can speak on behalf of the county. Thank you so much, Commissioner, all the great work that you do. And thank you so much for being a champion on the commission board.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right on. So Rashida, I would just say it starts with our values. It progresses with our understanding of these design practices that are equity and human-centered. And we have a resource for the Creative Reaction Lab, which is work that we highly recommend if people are wanting to learn more of it. And that is what has really helped. When we have done our past unconditional cash tests, we always ask our participants to join us as researchers, right? To honor their knowledge and wisdom as primary to understanding what we're testing, right? And so the mother's trust is built upon all of those voices, those hundreds of voices that have participated in these other efforts, along with being inspired by the Magnolia Mothers Trust, which we've also put a link into. So we take inspiration from a lot of places, and it is always centered in racial justice and equity, and the lived experience centered.
Thank you so much, Mary. I will ask the last question of the panel because I know we want to hear from folks who have asked questions in the chat. So can you talk about, and this is to all of the panelists, because for ARPA, that was one-time only money. And, even though the allocations to localities was significant, it really has to Counties and cities are really thinking about ways to sustain their efforts so that it could succeed and that there's no cliff effect, especially that the families experience. So can you talk a little bit about your plans for sustainability? And then, how are you able to overcome the federal relief funds and how they can be used because they're one time only? DC is in a very fortunate place because you have the birth of three law, but definitely, feel free to talk about, your plans for sustainability.
Sure, I'm happy to start, and ours is an easier one. Again, our strategy was we've already got a plan. We're listening to what families really want and need, and we want to use the American Rescue Plan dollars to just leverage what exists and what we need more of. So we plan to stick to our anti-racist principles and values and to continue monitoring the current investments that have been made with ARPA or are about to be made in ARPA. But we want to continue to fully fund birth to three, again, which is the combination of childcare and family health supports. I'm putting a link to our anti-racist values if they are helpful to anyone as a guide in organizing communities and a way to set community agreements on coalitions. So anyway, maybe that is just a short way to answer, is just to continue to monitor. We have some very specific asks of, as you saw from the slides, and how we're using our ARPA dollars. And so we're testing some things. We'll see if they work. But we are very much aware of the fiscal cliff that is surely to come in 2024 and 2025. And so building in multi-year plans now to prepare for that is very high on our list for all of our coalitions.
Thank you, Kim. And folks, feel free to chime in. And we also, this kind of ties into the sustainability question, but, would love to know how, I'm so sorry, I'm bad at this. This is really for Multnomah County, how you're addressing the fiscal cliff, the benefits cliff for families. So how are you sustaining your efforts? And then how are you addressing the benefits cliff issues? And then we'll pitch it over to Jennifer to answer that.
Sure.
Sustainability question.
So let me be clear, one-time only money is not bad money to have. And, I think in my experience, I worked for county government for a very long time, is that, we in government are risk avoidant. And we want to know where the precedent has been set first. And then we feel like we could put our toe in the water. That can't always happen when you're talking about the kind of systemic change that we have been talking about here today. So, would I love to have everything funded fully on general fund from the start? Yes, I would. That's not the organization I work for. The organization I work for needs to be able to have some additional new resource that helps them understand how this new strategy or this new approach might be a positive one that should be continued. And I have had a lot of experience over the years of starting tests and new work and new projects off on one-time only money or new resource, and then working to build that into an understanding of what is the ongoing path forward. I think in terms of the two things, when I did my overview, I talked about partnership, particularly with philanthropy. That is a very effective way to go. And we have a number of really wonderful philanthropic organizations, both in the county and in the state, who share similar racial justice and equity values and goals, and so have been partners with us in a number of our previous unconditional cash transfer tests. And we hope to have them be a part of those tests in the future. And quite frankly, the cliff gets softened to maybe a horrible downhill roll when families have access to cash. So again, it's reinforcing that if we understand why so many families are living in poverty, not because they are bad people who have made bad choices, but because the systems that we exist in, create this necessity for people to live in poverty, then offering services which are life-giving, and we should not stop doing them, is not going to help with that cliff, right? I talked earlier about we don't want to hire navigators to better get people through our systems with no guarantee of getting assistance. We need to be able to offer cash that allows people to have autonomy, self-determination, and hope. And that's how we address the cliff, along with working with advocates to try to extend eviction moratoriums and other types of protections, both from the federal, state, and local levels.
Excellent, Jennifer. What are your plans for sustainability?
Well, when we set up our resource center, I apologize for my voice today. We have done this in strong collaboration with community partners, including our Skagit Community Foundation, our Early Learning Coalition, our statewide building Help Me Grow system. And I think that our state is on track to be doing more work with family resource centers. There actually was, family resource centers were put into statute by one of our legislators this year, who has a goal of having 300 family resource centers across the state. So there's some opportunities there. Working with the Help Me Grow framework is our opportunity to actually have this data available to us also that can help tell the story about what the needs are in the community, who is accessing and who isn't accessing services, and help us to be more equitable in our work as well. So we're still just in the very early learning stages. I'm so inspired by Kim and Mary with your innovation and testing approaches. And I feel like we're doing that in just like a teeny little way in Skagit County. So thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to encourage folks to feel free to ask any questions that you may have in the chat. This is your time. And so I'll just keep the conversation going while we wait on more folks to chime in with questions. But Mary, you talked a little bit about partnerships earlier in your remarks, and I think that that is a great strategy for sustaining your financing efforts. So just on the broader kind of policy efforts, did you coordinate with others, whether it's state, city, or regional? I know for DC, you act as both the state and local government, but you have access to other regional efforts through Maryland and Virginia. And so I just wanted to ask, was there any type of coordination that you were able to do with other policymakers or private philanthropic organizations in your efforts? And then what are some of the considerations?
Thanks, Rashida. We have a little bit of a joke that says we don't sneeze unless it's in partnership with collaboration with our key folks around us. And that is both a joke and it's also really true. So again, if we have the value of working with those closest to the challenge, and centering the lived experience and expertise of folks who have those challenges, it requires us to be in collaboration and partnership of all sorts with all sorts of folks, both people in the communities themselves, and our other partners systemically. We want to have our eyes on the individual experience and use that to develop the systems and the practices, right, as you go up. So we're not solely focused on what's the experience of the individual person. We care deeply about that, and we want to hear that from as many people as possible so that we might understand what system solutions could be. And again, when you have that approach, you are talking to your other public colleagues in jurisdictions. You are talking with philanthropic organizations. You're talking with business organizations. You're talking, Kim, you listed some of your partners and in some of the amazing work you all done there. And I would say it probably wouldn't have happened had you not built a coalition that had all of those people from all of those different perspectives trying to find where they had commonality. And I think this is very important. Sometimes when we talk about being in partnership, people think, well, we all have to agree the same thing for the same reason at the same time, or it's not partnership. And I don't hold to that as well. I can be in large disagreement and conflict with an individual or a sector partner or whatever. And my job in my role is to find out not where we have disagreement, but where is the issue of shared value and focus and purpose. Because once we can say that, when there's conflict, when there's challenge, when we, invariably stub our knees and the process stops, coming back to that shared value, that shared perspective, that shared aspiration is the way that we move forward. And we have learned this and seen this time and time again. So again, I'm going to go back to, it could sound pie in the sky, but it's very transactional for me. What is the aspiration? What are we trying to do? What is the values that are underpinning that aspiration? Then you figure out the mission. And Commissioner Janicki, I think, spoke to this very well, Jennifer. Then the mission catalyzes your partners to come in and engage. And then you got a movement starting, right? That's what we're trying to do here. And it's both lofty and big, but it comes down to individual relationships and intentionality in who you're talking to, how you're talking to them and with them, and how you're moving forward on that.
Thank you, Mary. Kim and Jennifer, anything you'd like to share about any state or regional efforts that you've used in your approach? Any partners that you'd like to share that you've coordinated with that stand out?
Sure. I guess we are very fortunate in the northwest corner of Washington to have a really strong regional early learning coalition, and our state has a coalition of early learning coalitions. And I feel like we learn so much from each other. Our Help Me Grow system in our state also has a core team that's a state agency and the coalition of early learning coalitions and a nonprofit organization that are working together. And I think having that mix really makes things work, where somebody can apply for a grant here that another group may not be eligible for, and they're trying to be very strategic in their approach and equipping us with tools for being more equitable in our work. That is supposed to be our driving force, not, the retrofitting of the work that we do. We also have an amazing accountable community of health in our region that we are trying to partner with for this work. They also have a lot of amazing tools and have really inspired us in our equity journey. And we've hired Promotoras and community health workers in our department recently, which has really changed the game for us in the way that we approach our work.
Great. And I'll just say, I was like, oh, is this the part where I get to name all of our great partners? So I will note the District of Columbia has a tax and budget group like most states. Ours is DC Fiscal Policy Institute, and they are amazing in policy analysis, but also experts in tax policy. And really, they were the driver and the expertise behind our revenue raiser this year. Most states weren't able to do a revenue raiser when all of this federal money was coming into the district. Again, but because we had this larger plan, we just continued to go through. So I do want to note the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. The second is the District of Columbia has a Fair Budget Coalition with over almost nearly 200 small community-based organizations working on everything from food security to housing and other human needs. And that coalition, it took a lot for that coalition, our coalitions, and the Way Home campaign, which is our affordable housing and homelessness eradication coalition, for those three massive coalitions to come together as one coalition to be united in all these needs was really massive. And so it just is hats off to so many people who saw the greater good.
Thank you. I have one question and then we'll wrap up. Is there, if there's one piece of advice that you can give to our audience, what would that be as they're pursuing the Prenatal-to-Three work?
Trust parents, trust educators, trust family support workers, trust our folks who are on the ground working with families every day. We don't know more than they do. They have so much insight. We don't need them to tell us their stories and then we tell their stories. let's step back, let's connect them to be able to tell their stories directly, and just really value the solutions they bring to the table.
Excellent. Mary and Jennifer.
Well, I would just say things I've said many times during this conversation, which is start in the middle and in the end with your aspirations and values. And then I think Karen put this in the chat, it can be done. You start with vision, you start with value, you start with aspiration, and it can be done. So if you keep those two things in mind, and I would guess that this group of people already understands those things and is doing it, because otherwise they wouldn't be a part of this cohort. So I commend you all for your work and say, right on, let's all keep going.
Thank you. And Jennifer.
I think just have a plan. I can't really say anything that's more unique than what Mary and Kim have said. Relationships really matter. Listening to the community and putting their needs first and letting them be the lead.
Thank you. Thank you to our panel. Thank you so much, Mary, Kim, and Jennifer, and to Commissioner Janicki, who had to leave us. Thank you so much for being innovators and champions in PM3. And so I'd like for the build team to pull up this slide. We will be sharing this recording with folks. I want to share one piece of information about a couple of events coming up. I want to invite you to register to part 3 of this webinar, and that is the Justice from the Start Healthcare, and that is on October the 28th. At 3 o'clock. And also, please feel free to join this conversation in the exchange. The exchange is a valuable resource for folks to connect with one another, especially our state and community innovation grantees. So thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and let's continue this work. Thank you.